Hi, and welcome to this live reading from Azrael by Matthew Huntley, and this is presented by Itsy Bitsy Book Bits. Chapter 1. The sun filtered through the windows, blinding the heavily hungover cop. His coffee had already lost its steam, but it didn't matter. He needed the caffeine more than he needed the warmth. The warmth had left his heart and his bed a long time ago. As he lifted the mug to his lips, a strong knock came at the door. Who in hell could that be? No one came knocking on his door, not for a long time now, not since his move from Oswego to Buffalo. He was a no one, a write-off detective who had lost his eye for detail years ago. He was lucky now to make ends meet with the small private jobs he took on. Grabbing his Glock off the counter, he stepped toward the door. "What do you want?" "Detective Parker Williams, I'm looking for Levi Andrews." Detective? What the hell was a detective doing on his doorstep? Levi thought back to his past activities in Buffalo, but nothing came to mind that would involve the police. He'd made sure to keep his nose clean, only taking on the jobs of the mundane, cheating husbands and wives, stalkers, creepers, etc., none of which resulted in anything that should bring a detective knocking. "Can I ask what this is about?" he asked through the door while putting his gun away. If he opened the door holding that thing after the detective announced himself, all hell would break loose. "It's about Azrael." The blood seemed to drain out of Levi as he stared at the hardwood door. "There's been another murder." Every fiber in his body urged him to run. He no longer felt hungover, but instead felt the pulse of fear pumping through his body. He hadn't felt a rush like this since his last night on the force back in Oswego. How was there another murder? Why had they come looking for him to help? Questions and doubts swirled in his head as he stared at the faded wood that separated him from the detective. His gut warned him not to let the officer inside, but that he needed to keep the door between them. He knew better, though. He had to let the detective inside, or they would suspect something. There was nothing to suspect, and he wanted to keep it that way, but he also didn't want to get sucked into the pitfall that was Oswego PD. With indecision heavy on his mind, Levi reached down and opened the door. Detective Parker Williams stood a few feet from the door, weary but dressed in the typical detective wear. The five-piece suit, shiny shoes, and a hard-ass expression that gave no room to question his authority. It was a similar expression Levi used to wear before he lost everything. The only thing he could never manage to pull off was the shiny shoes. Somehow his always looked like they'd been soaked in mud for days. "Quite the dark introduction," Levi remarked while opening the door wider for the detective. If Parker was there to ask for help, he'd be groveling for a while. Levi had no desire to head back into the field. He was, however, interested to hear more about why this detective thought Azrael was involved with the newest murders. Not only had it been 10 years since the bastard's last killing spree, he'd also been caught. Parker stepped inside the small, sparse apartment. The walls were bare, minus the stains from water damage. There was only one light that seemed to work in the kitchen, while another one flickered in the hallway. Levi watched the detective as he scoped out his shitty apartment. The hall led to a small bathroom that was barely big enough to get his ass in the tub. The bedroom wasn't much better. "Didn't figure you would let me in without a motive," Parker replied. Levi couldn't deny the truth of his statement. He probably wouldn't have let him in had he not spouted off something about Azrael. Levi's career had hindered on that bastard for years until one day everything was gone, and Levi could care less about any of it. The killing, the police, his life. It was all pointless in the end, or so he had thought. "Have a seat," Levi said while flopping down on the sofa. He scratched at his 3-day-old stubble and couldn't help but notice how young Parker looked. Compared to his clean suit and smooth face, Levi looked homeless in his sweats and navy blue shirt with a hole at the collar. It shouldn't be this way. He should be the one coming in looking like Parker, clean and full of authority. Levi had at least 20 years on the kid. All those opportunities went out the window for him, though, 10 years ago. He would like to blame the alcohol, but it was so much more than that. "So, tell me, what makes you think that this is Azrael? I mean, you know we caught the guy, right?" Parker laughed, and it made Levi's stomach turn. "Yeah, because no one has ever been wrongfully arrested, and convicted of a crime." He tossed a folder between the two of them, causing the photos inside to spill out across the cushions. "I think we both know better." Levi picked up the photo on top, but his eyes kept traveling to the one on the bottom. The feet overlaying one another with a single stake drove down the middle. This couldn't be. It couldn't. His heart picked up the pace as he tried to appear calm. He didn't want to throw any alarms just yet. "This is very similar to the case you worked 10 years ago," Parker said. He was going to try and start stroking his ego. "Similar, but are they the same?" Levi questioned. "You could be dealing with a copycat," he remarked while continuing to look at the photos. The hands on the makeshift crucifix, which were made of 4x4 lumber, were marked with the same bloody markings. The word liar written across the male's forehead, with slut written across the woman's. Flashes of the last case assaulted his memory. The woman's open eyes, the blood running down her body. Casually, he set the photos down and tried concentrating on his breath. He felt like he was going to be sick, but he didn't want the young detective to see him in the state. Focusing on the stain in the middle of the floor, Levi tried focusing on his breathing. Parker's movement as he leaned forward onto his knees broke his concentration. "You know as well as I do that this is no copycat. Look at the detail. It's too pristine." Parker held out another picture for him to look at. It was the girl, covered in blood and marks of shame, her eyes void of life. Every detail is there, things that were not released for public knowledge. It was Levi's turn to bark out laughter. "As if people in a small town like Oswego don't talk, even when they're ordered not to do so. Hell, there wasn't a thing I didn't tell my wife." This turned his sour stomach for a loop. The mere mention of his wife always did, as did the images of her bloodied body the night he'd found her. "Why did you come here, Parker?" Levi asked, his voice drained of emotion. Parker's voice dropped as if he was approaching a timid cat. The notion angered Levi even more. "Detective Andrews, I came here in hopes you could help me track down the killer." "I've already caught this killer," Levi said, outraged. He had every right to be outraged. Parker had no right to be sitting here on his couch. The file of Azrael should not have been between them. The pain in his chest shouldn't be stealing his breath, but it was. Why was this happening again? How? He grabbed the rest of the photos and read over the file. There had to be something different about this case. He was sure of it. Azrael was already identified and caught. There was no doubt this was a copycat. It had to be. "I didn't come here to accuse you of not doing a good job. People have been framed before while the real evil bastard went free. For all we know, that is exactly what could have happened in this case. The murderer framed someone else, laid dormant for 10 years, and waited until he felt it was time to come back out. That time is now. He's back and eager to get started again." Levi's muscles bunched under his dirty shirt. He didn't like the possible logic Parker had brought before him. It created doubt Levi didn't want there for himself or for anyone else. "Who all have you told about this? The doubt, I mean." "No one," Parker answered, and relief flooded through Levi. The last thing he needed was the department sniffing around again. They'd dredged up the past and rack it with a fine-tooth comb. He'd already done that enough himself without someone breathing down his neck. "And I'll keep it that way if you will do a favor for me in return." Parker scooted up to the edge of his seat. "I need your help solving this one. You may be the only one who can help." Levi shook his head. He did not want to get sucked back into this case. He had put this behind him a long time ago, and for good reason. "You don't know that this is the original Azrael. If it's not, I'm no good to you." It was a piss-poor excuse, but he needed time to think of a better defense. Parker laced his fingers in front of him and stared intently at Levi. "You're right. I don't know if this is the original Azrael, but you would. It's why I came asking for your help. Come back with me to Oswego, take a glance around the crime scene, and see what you think. That's all I'm asking." It was a bullshit line. He was asking for more than that. If Levi did decide to go back with him, Parker knew Levi wouldn't be able to leave without closing the case. When he continued to sit there, unsure and silent, Parker leaned forward with sympathy in his eyes. Levi hated sympathy. "Losing your partner and your wife the way you did, I wouldn't blame you." "That's enough," Levi roared. He didn't need a guilt trip or the sympathy card played to help encourage him to make a decision. He was perfectly capable of doing it on his own. Parker tossing out shit words to which he didn't understand was going to cause him to get nothing from Levi but a swift kick in the ass. Levi was sure of his decision not to go back to Oswego. It was too much. The memories, the minds that would question his sudden appearance, the departments looking over his shoulder. Still, there were some things that didn't settle well with him, and it made him restless. When did the last murder occur? He knew he shouldn't be asking these types of questions, not if he was going to stay clear of the case, but that restless rumble in his veins was pacing, and he wanted to know more. There was a part of him that needed to know more. 2 days ago, Parker answered. Levi stood to his feet, indecision heavy on his mind. This case was supposed to be laid to rest, never to be seen again. If he went back now, things could be brought back to light, things he wanted to keep buried. If he turned it down, though, it would make him look weak. It may even bring suspicion, especially if Detective Parker went back and told the police chief he suspected the wrong killer had been caught. Then they would question him and reopen the case. He needed to be there if they opened the old file cases. If his dark past was to unfold, he wanted to be there to bury secrets him and his partner had buried long ago. They were meant to stay in the past. "When are you leaving?" he asked. He didn't want to give the young detective false hope, but he needed to know what his time limit was. There were so many variables he would have to decipher before making a solid decision. It was too late. Levi could already see the hope in Parker's face. "At 6, we have to be back in the office by morning." The muscle in his jaw twitched as he looked at the clock. "Where can I meet you?" "You're going?" Parker asked, excitement filling his voice. That was yet to be determined. "Undecided. I'll let you know by 5. He led Parker back out the door and closed it with a click after reassuring the young detective that he would meet him at 5 at the corner diner 1 block over. Inside alone, he took a deep breath. He had to keep it together. If he lost his shit now, he wouldn't be able to make a solid decision. Plus, he had to wrap up some business of his own before meeting the detective.